Yo, parish orphans and retrogrades. Happy Thursday as we approach the end of May. Today I bring to you a different kind of show, a special show, one that involves ecclesiology and magisterium and questions of Roman Catholicism at near the bone, near its foundation. Specifically, sorry, I feel like I'm going in and out. Specifically, what of papal supremacy? Is papal supremacy, the way it's sometimes alleged by Eastern Orthodox Christians, is it actually a first millennium Christian theme that's like a thin blue line that runs all the way through Christianity, the way we claim, or is it an innovation of the early second millennium? That's a fairly basic question, and it's got a fairly basic answer. But I'll say this for starters, I'm treating of this question because it's been bouncing around the interwaves a lot lately, and I'm friendly with Eastern Orthodox, especially Jay Dyer. There was Spaces last night. I tuned in for about 5 minutes, saw there wouldn't be spaces really for me to talk, a Catholic to talk, and I basically only had 5 or 10 minutes anyway because I was watching the Mavs game, and so I figured, hey, I'll just take a couple notes and go live, and that's good enough. I will say this also. People have asked me. I'm not a fan of Twitter Spaces. There's almost no way to jump in, particularly on a difficult, or at least it's not a difficult topic, but a detailed topic with any layers of sophistication whatsoever. Because no one knows, because you're not seeing. It's like a phone call between 400 people, and yeah, there's only 5 speakers. But it makes me very uncomfortable. I'd rather go on someone's show and be looking at their mouth so I can, because I really don't like interrupting, and I really don't like being interrupted. So papal supremacy, that's today's show. I'm going to give you a surefire way of defending it. And then I'm going to admit something about Roman Catholicism that is a blind spot. Now, it's the one true faith. And papal supremacy is rather easy to shore up. But there is something I want to address at the end as a kind of conceptual weakness. And that's how today's show will go. So stay tuned for that. I want to encourage everyone before June hits in about a week. I want you all to, if you live in a tacky blue state, to consider getting out of your blue state and getting to a red state today. Go to www.realestateforlife.org, where a pro-life, pro-Catholic person will help you leave your communist blue state for the sunny shores of a red state. And yes, I know the irony is that many of the red states are landlocked. They don't have shores. Well, the good red states, beautiful ones, like the one I reside in, do have shores. realestateforlife.org. Get out of your blue state, get to a red state. Today, it's what I did. I went from the bluest of the blue to the reddest of the red. Also, support this show because we need your help. You're going to see some of the large projects that I've been working on unfurl, be publicized this summer in front of not just the Catholic world, but it should be all the world. It's going to be quite an interesting thing. Support this show, not on Patreon anymore. I got kicked off, but under the Patreon modality at Locals and Subscribestar, where we have replacement patrons, essentially. We just opened up 2 new features. One is we're going through Lord of the Rings, my friend Anthony and I, with a book club, chapter by chapter through the entire trilogy. We're in the middle of the 2 Towers at this point, but all those recorded chapter club meetings from Fellowship of the Ring and 2 Towers and eventually Return of the King, as we go through them, will be logged away for patrons and only for patrons. The other new feature is called Behind the Scenes Behind My House, where each Saturday I do between 8 and 12 minutes of breakdown, tell you behind the scenes stuff from anyone that was a guest on the show, or just additional thoughts I had before, during, or after the show that I didn't say on the wider show. That's only for patrons on Locals and Subscribestar. Please join as a member today, because we need your help. Also, if you can't do that, remember to like and subscribe this video and get the notifications. So, papal supremacy is not some clever accretion of early second millennium Roman Catholic thought. It just isn't. And that's not a debatable point. Let's begin at the beginning. Let's begin. This isn't the strongest bit of evidence, but it is an undeniable bit of evidence. The fourth pope, around 100 AD, Clement I, wrote to the church in Corinth, warning them, take my word, follow my decision. This is outside of his diocese. He's telling them what to do. Seems very much like an early exercise of universal jurisdiction, to which some deniers of universal jurisdiction, Protestants and Orthodox, will retort that maybe he'd been asked for his advice. And did he butt in? Doesn't really matter. We have Pope number 4, Clement number 1, responding, even let's say to a hypothetical question. And they turned to him for advice when John the Apostle was still alive in Ephesus. And instead, you have Clement being like, follow this decision. It's quite important. Oh, sorry, I'm going in and out. Yeah. Now, this is an important historical event that builds the case, but it doesn't prove things on its own. It just proves, okay, there's one pope right around the turn of the first, second Christian century, very early on, 4th out of 266, that at least attempts to exercise a universal jurisdiction. Interesting, no? What I want to turn to next is a weapon that I use frequently, and I would urge all of you to use this weapon as well. Now, before I get blocked, I am talking about the Catena Aurea. Thomas Aquinas's collocated patristical commentaries on the four Gospels. Now, Thomas here doesn't weigh in himself, aside from little places where he says gloss, but that's occasional. This is Thomas being the world's greatest scholar, probably second smartest man ever after Aristotle. I go back and forth on that, but world's greatest scholar. He collocated for each 2, 3, 4 verses of the four Gospels. He goes, pause, okay, let me take these 4 verses, and I'm going to collocate for my readers in the Catena Aurea everything that every patristic ever commented on those 3 or 4 verses from Scripture. And I'm going to put them all together. So all you do is you buy volume 1, Matthew's Gospel, the Catena, that means golden chain. Matthew's Gospel, and you go to a relevant passage in Scripture. Here it is, Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. I'll read it. And I also say unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And 19 too. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Now, we throw this line at Protestants all the time, and I don't know what they say. Protestant apologetics seem especially funny to me. They don't even know, oftentimes, that there is a set of patristics who commented on this. I mean, some of them do. that these have been collocated by Thomas, and that it's very embarrassing for those who say that, like, there is no office of priest or bishop or head bishop of all the world, Pope. The Eastern Orthodox position, to which I guess I'm shadowboxing today. Normally I bring people straight on, but I wanted to get this out. I'm shadowboxing with it today because the Orthodox know, of course, that there are presbyters and episcopi and a pope, but they have this, I guess they would call it a sophisticated stance with regard to the rapport born between the three, especially between the Pope, the See of Rome, in the Tetrarchy, the five original sees: Rome, Constantinople, Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, the five C's. And they are kind of ranked ordinally. Orthodox will admit that. And they reified, I think this is a second Christian millennium accretion, fabrication. They reified this idea of being first among equals. I'm going to talk about this later when I talk about Catholic conceptual difficulty. I'm going to talk about that with regard to. So this means that you have an impotent commander who cannot command. Kind of like mutual submission. There's so many Catholic feminists, right? And I'm always criticizing them, and a lot of times the Eastern Orthodox guys are with me. This is so lame. This idea of mutual submission. Well, this is a commander who's impotent, who can't command. But that is a circular square. That doesn't exist. That's a contradiction in terms. So I want to talk philosophically about this idea that the Orthodox sort of reified, maybe late first millennium, early second millennium, of a commander, the Pope, who's in charge, who can't command. Well, I want to talk right now. I'm going to cite some Eastern fathers. I'll probably also cite some Western fathers here in my handy-dandy Catena Aurea on Matthew 16:18. And I just thought, let's go there, because Peter's the rock, ain't he? Protestants say stupid stuff. Orthodox say more thoughtful stuff, but it's pushing back in a basically Protestant, anti-authoritarian, anti-patriarchy direction. You got to have Papa to have a patriarchy, and neither the Orthodox nor the Protestants, to varying degrees, acknowledge Papa. Well, look at this father here, Eastern father. He was actually a patriarch of Alexandria, I believe the 5th See. Writing on Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, he says, "According to this promise of the Lord, the apostolic church of Peter remains pure and spotless from all leading into error or heretical fraud, above all heads and bishops and primates of churches." That means he knows the Pope is above him. "And people with its own pontiffs, with most abundant faith in the authority of Peter. And while other churches have to blush for the error of some of their members, this reigns alone immovably established, enforcing silence and stopping the mouths of all heretics." This is universal jurisdiction, friends. Right? You have a prior restraint power, enforcing silence. We call that prior restraint. Posterior restraint, stopping the mouths of all heretics. Immovably established. Wet, not drunken with the wine of pride. Confess together with it the type of truth and of the holy apostolic tradition. Wow. Thank you. So I know I had some friends that were being persuaded on last night's Spaces. Well, this is Patriarch of Alexandria, Cyril, in like the 400s. "The apostolic church of Peter remains pure and spotless from all leading into error." Whereas the other churches can fall into error because of their bishops. He says, or heretical fraud. He is above all heads and bishops and primates of churches and people with its own pontiffs, with most abundant faith and the authority of Peter. And while the other churches have to blush for their error, This reigns alone, immovably established, being able to enforce silence, stopping the mouths of all heretics. This is just universal jurisdiction. This same Cyril of Alexandria says the following, writes the following in his document PG 72, code section 423. Is that contra erroris Graecorum? Christ makes Peter the church's pastor. Literally, he placed Peter over it as his shepherd. He also remember this word shepherd. It means shepherd of shepherds here. I mean, the first quote I read to you by Cyril is probably even more powerful. But this same Cyril also called Pope Celestine Archbishop of the entire habitable world. So there's jurisdictions with sub-jurisdictions according to universal jurisdiction. That's the argument. And he just said, Pope Celestine is the Archbishop of the entire habitable world. This is PG 77, subsection 1040. Also, Cyril of Alexandria more or less taught the filioque. More or less, and I know people will say, well, where's the more, where's the less? I'm not doing that today, but he's also famous for basically prefiguring the filioque. And he's I guess he's an Eastern father, right? Alexandria, Egypt. Eastern father, preemptively siding, centuries before the split with the West. Well, that's not nothing. So I had friends that came out of that Spaces last night being like, it sounded like papal supremacy together with its universal jurisdiction is some sort of accretion or invention or innovation of the second millennium. Well, it's not. It's not. No, you want it? Okay, we can go more. I'm still in the Catena. Here is Chrysostom, another Eastern father. He writes a lot here. When the Lord inquires concerning the opinion of the multitudes, all the disciples answer. But when all the disciples are asked, Peter, as the mouth and the head of the apostles, answers for all. Oops. Now, this is very important. I mean, this is a little bit more figurative, but it's that Peter is not only the head of the apostles, which a lot of times they'd be like, okay, he's the Peter's the head, Peter's in charge, but mutual submission, first among equals. He's also the mouth. When you're the mouth and the head, this means you make decisions and you bespeak them yourself. So you have the power of conceptualization and promulgation. Yeah, you tell. You conceive and then you tell. And there's almost like an implication of zero filtration. The mouth and the head. The head communicates to the mouth and boom. So this is Chrysostom. Peter is the mouth and the head of the apostles who answers for all. That's papal supremacy. That's Chrysostom. That's one of their big guys. Here's more Chrysostom. And this is on Matthew 16, verse 18. On this faith and confession, I will build my church, herein showing that many should believe what Peter had confessed, and raising his understanding, made him his, capital H, shepherd. Same expression that Cyril uses. So, yeah, I know priests are called shepherds. Bishops are called shepherds. Archbishops are called shepherds. But both Cyril and Chrysostom, two Eastern fathers, long before the second Christian millennium, say that he's the shepherd of shepherds. That's what they're talking about. And this is a direct implication that follows automatically because we already know that, Peter and all the apostles had already been considered the shepherds. Okay, you're apostles, you're going to be bishops. But he made him a new kind of, the shepherd of shepherds there. Yeah, okay, we'll still go more. We'll go more. Chrysostom, this is sort of derivative or tertiary, but Chrysostom says, Then he speaks of another honor of Peter. Then he speaks of another honor of Peter when he adds, and I will give thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, as much as to say, as the Father hath given thee to know me, I also will give something unto thee, namely the keys of the kingdom of heaven. The most important word in this third or fourth line of Chrysostom on Matthew 16, verse 18, is the key term, another. Then he speaks of another honor of Peter when he adds. So I thought this is so important because as common sense derivative as it is, that calling Peter the shepherd, thank you, the shepherd and the shepherd of shepherds, who can order the other shepherds to do things, which he's implied earlier, is something, it's an honorific at least. He says it's not just that, it's like a specific power. And it's another specific kind of power that the Lord confers when he adds, I give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And it's related and it's derivative to the first power, but they're not like both in one. These are real powers that he's giving him that the other apostles don't have. He's the shepherd of the shepherds. They don't have that. They're just shepherds of the people. But he's the shepherd of the shepherds of the people, is one of the terms of Rome. And as shepherd of shepherd is the first one, he's given the keys to the kingdom. And he has this binding and loosing power, which generationally flows to the lesser apostles, the bishops. And that flows from the bishops to the priests all throughout the world. So it's another honor of Peter. Thank you. Now we have Rabbinus Maurus. On the same thing, I'm in the Catena Aurea on Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. Peter's the rock. This is pretty good. He was a Frankish Benedictine monk, theologian, poet, encyclopedist, and military writer who became Archbishop of Mainz in East Francia. So I don't think he's not considered an Eastern father. And also, this is late 8th century, but still first millennium. But he's more Oriental if he's West. He wrote treatises on education, grammar, commentaries on the Bible. He's one of the most prominent teachers and writers of the Carolingian age, which led to, the Carolingian dynasty is like, Charles Martel leading up to the guy among guys that sort of started some of the serious fights with the eventual Eastern Orthodox, Charles Martel's grandson. And they were the Carolingians. And he's also called the teacher of Germany. In the most recent edition of the Roman Martyrology, Rabbinus Maurus Magnentius, his feast is given as February the 4th, and he's qualified as a saint. So I'm just going to call him Rabbinus because this is what Thomas calls him. I mean, it's just compelling stuff. For as with a zeal beyond the others he had confessed the King of heaven, he is deservedly entrusted more than the others with the keys of the heavenly kingdom, that it might be clear to all that without the confession and faith, none ought to enter the kingdom of heaven. So that's important to the kind of stuff that was being bandied about in last night's spaces. By the keys of heaven, he means discernment and power. Power by which he binds and looses, discernment by which he separates the worthy from the unworthy. This doesn't just include sinners. This would include as the shepherd of shepherds, those worthy things that they say, teachings that they say. Rabbinus goes on, but this power of binding and loosing, though it seems given by the Lord to Peter alone, is indeed given also to the other apostles, and is even now in the bishops and presbyters in every church, which I happen to have said this, right? It flows from the head bishop to the other bishops to the priests. But Peter received in a special manner the keys of the kingdom of heaven, And this is not the second Christian millennium. This is before the Great Schism. Peter received in a special manner the keys of the kingdom of heaven and a supremacy of judicial power. Judicial power. This means you're judging the law, the legislative powers of the bishops. That's what a judicial power means. A supremacy of judicial power. Papal supremacy. Thank you, Ravenous. And all the faithful throughout the world might understand that all who in any manner separate themselves from the unity of the faith, this goes really specifically to last night's talk, or from communion with him, and should neither be able to be loosed from the bonds of sin, nor to enter the gate of the heavenly kingdom. Why, that's remarkable. So from Clement I, Pope number 4, around 100 AD, through to the Eastern Fathers I cited, and this really, really remarkable Eastern Father, Cyril, the Patriarch of Alexandria, who basically is prefiguring Catholic teachings, 700 years before the split, 600 years before the split. He's like, I'm an Eastern Patriarch, and dig this. Ravenous is really good. Check out what Origen says. I mean, you just can't argue with this stuff. See how great power has that rock upon which the church is built, that its sentences are to continue firm as though God gave sentence by it. So this is that, and this is not so much a Catholic Orthodox argument, but this is what goofy Protestants will say. Well, he gave this power to Peter of being the supreme pastor. The guy I debated on Trent Horn's channel in the fall was saying this. But that didn't flow from Peter to the next pope. That's made up, he said. Well, Origen thought so. Its sentences are to continue firm as though God gave sentence by them. So there's a continuity and a contiguity to the bindingness of papal teachings from Peter on down. There's a lot. There's tons of Jerome and Ambrose, Anselm. These are considered Western fathers, but they're all saying the same stuff. Papal supremacy definitely comes from Scripture, from Matthew 16:18. And they're not using the terms because, like the defenses of the faith against would-be feminism, all of these patristics are writing against a monster that has not yet been birthed out of the heads of schismatics, like Athena springing from Zeus's head. So they're writing by implication against the would-be gainsayers, future gainsayers of papal supremacy. They're tracing the logic that one would use to gainsay the gainsayers, but it's in the future, so they don't have the specific terms. Even so, it's remarkable how specific a lot of their arguments are. Now, here's a gloss section by Thomas in the Catena, Matthew 16:18. He says, I'm kind of getting this idea from St. Anselm. This power was committed specially to Peter that we might thereby be invited to unity. Oh, wow. Now this is really connecting the dots. Now, I think Anselm antedates 1054, does he not? And Thomas, of course, postdates 1054. Let me just double check this. Because, I mean, if he really gets it from Anselm, then it's remarkable because this is another pre-1054 idea. Here's what Anselm said. I'm gonna just get Anselm's. Here's what Anselm says. The power was committed specially to Peter that we might thereby be invited to unity. The mark of unity on earth is the Pope. For he therefore appointed him the head of the apostles, that the church might have one principal vicar of Christ, to whom the different members of the church should have recourse, if ever they should have dissensions among them. Wow. Okay, this sounds really relevant to 1054. If the bishops and archbishops have Dissent among them, well, we have a tiebreaker, a guy with papal supremacy. But if there were many heads in the church, the bond of unity would be broken. You can't have unity where all the brothers, the brother bishops, are squabbling. Sounds like, not to put too fine a point on it, why Soloviev left Orthodoxy. Remember what he told Dostoevsky? Without Papa, the Pope, you can never call the brothers, the bishops and archbishops and primates, to the table. You have to have one that's ahead. For unity, you need Papa. Some say that the words upon earth denote that power was not given to men to bind and loose the dead, but the living. For he who should loose the dead would do this not upon the earth, but after the earth. So this is interesting. Anselm is writing this right. When did he postulate? Right around. I thought he was earlier in the 10s. It's like he lived from 1033 to 1109, so he might have written what I just cited after 1054. You know, assuming he was 21 or older. Okay, I thought he was a little earlier in the second millennium. I thought he was born right after the millennium. So there's that. So I read you Chrysostom. I mean, here's the idea that I want to really attack. The idea of a commander who cannot command. Now, I attack it, feels like every other show, when I attack these feminist Catholics, and by that I don't mean left Caths. I mean, I'm sorry to say it, establishment Catholics, Catholic Answers Catholics. I've taken slings and arrows from my appearance on even Matt Fradd's show, those kinds of Catholics who say, well, mutual submission, man. The J2B2s, you know, JP2 robot, Borgs, JP2, you know, made all this feminism and ecumenism popular, anti-death penalty stuff, kiss the Quran. I want women to blah, 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 be like dudes. But then he says in other cases, JP2, that women should be domestic and shouldn't be like dudes. So what the heck? What the heck? Well, I'm attacking those guys, not left Caths. And usually, if I do so on Twitter, the Ortho Bros, who I'm very friendly with, especially Jay. I really like a lot of these guys. I really like Jay. I've hung out in person. I like him. I think he's a good man. But if you criticize mutual submission the way I always do, and everyone's like, that's stupid. The husband's in charge, and the Bible makes so clear that the wife has to obey him in all things. And you say, he's commander, but he's a commander who really shouldn't be commanding. You're like, but St. Paul says that the wife is bound under pain of sin to follow every one of his commands, aside from those to do grave sin. And they're like, yeah, I know. But isn't he really weird if he commands his wife? No, he's not. They're just trying to, in a praxeological way, say, okay, the commander really should be impotent to command. That's what we hate about the Catholic feminists. And it's an embarrassment in the Catholic Church that it's stood down like a Minneapolis police force in the summer of 2020. Stood down on its teachings against feminism. Pro-patriarchy, it stood down on those. Well, I've been cheered on by lots of Ortho Bros when I say mutual submission is made up. It's stupid. It's a circular square. It's a contradiction in terms. A commander commands. The problem is then philosophically, conceptually, when they say, okay, well, we believe there is a pope, the Tetrarchy does enumerate the Bishop of Rome as the first ordinally ranked of the 5 Cs, but he's the first among equals. Oh, okay. It's a round table. What does that mean? That's not consistent with your own think. For one thing, it's not consistent with recto ratio. Because if the purpose of having a hierarchy is to have a pinnacle, right? Well, both Orthodox and Catholic make fun of the egalitarianism of Protestantism. Everyone's opinion counts the same. Literally every professing Christian who believes in the Trinity, their opinion counts the same on Scripture. It's ridiculous and embarrassing. Protestantism is ridiculous and embarrassing. Orthodox know that, Catholic know that. So they say, okay, look, the only way to not be an absurd modernist, is to say we reject egalitarianism, we believe in hierarchy, we believe in, a pyramidal structure. It goes all the way to the top. Well, the Orthodox want a pyramid that ends like this, like the pyramid on your dollar bill, but without a separation to a top, just this. The bishops are all the same. We just had this addressed, but I guess it's Anselm who was after the schism, but he puts it really nicely. If there were many heads in the church, the bond of unity would be broken. The different members of the church should have recourse to one vicar of Christ if ever they should have dissensions among them. Well, how do you have that if all the bishops are equal? And they're like, well, they're not equal. We acknowledge the Bishop of Rome is first. And they did for 1,000 years before they split off. He's first. First means you can command. And then they're like, well, no. And then you just cite, well, how about Chrysostom? Peter is the mouth and the head of the apostles and answers for all. Oh, okay. So he's the first among non-equals. There's no first among equals. If you take it from John Chrysostom, who's an Eastern father, on this faith and confession I will build my church, herein showing that many should believe what Peter had confessed, and raising his understanding, making him his shepherd, the shepherd of shepherds. That's also Chrysostom. Chrysostom also says that this is one of the honors of Peter, being called shepherd, because he calls the second thing in verse 19 another honor, the keys to the kingdom of heaven, which is his alone, like the power of being the unity of the church, the shepherd of the church, the rock. Then you go to another Eastern father, Cyril of Alexandria. According to this promise of the Lord, Peter, I make you the rock. The apostolic church of Peter remains pure and spotless from all leading into error or heretical fraud. So the specific context is when dissension of a false gospel is being bandied about by some of the apostles. Above all heads and bishops and primates of churches and people with its own pontiffs, with most abundant faith and the authority of Peter. So the other Peters, Peter number 2, Pope number 3, Pope number 4, has this papal supremacy that Peter has. Cyril of Alexandria, Eastern Patriarch of Alexandria, considered one of the Eastern Fathers. And while other churches have to blush for error, so other bishops will make errors, this reigns alone immovably established. And if you don't believe in universal jurisdiction, listen to what Cyril of Alexandria says here. Power to enforce silence. That's prior restraint of speech, of heretical speech. And to stop the mouths of all heretics. That's posterior restraint of speech. After a heretic has opened his mouth, you can go shut it. That's really, really, really remarkable. Cyril also says Christ makes Peter the church's pastor, literally placed Peter over it as its shepherd. PG 72, subsection 423. He also called Pope Celestine Archbishop of the entire habitable world. PG 77, 1040. He also basically prefigures the Filioque, favoring with the West. So guys, get the Catena Aurea. You get it one book at a time. This is Matthew. Not expensive. This is a very cheap copy of it, and I think it cost me $20. Then Mark, Luke, John. It is a weapon. There is a war on, and this is a weapon. This is my one-time favorite band, Earth Crisis, used to say, there's a war, this is a weapon. Okay, now, I know the Twitter Spaces last night was about, like Papae Dictatus. Let me get that up. Which is not even a Dictatus Papae Dictatus. It's Latin, so it can go either way. Let me just read what they're... it's not even like a hardcore teaching. It is a compilation of 27 statements of authority claimed by the Pope that was included in Pope Gregory VII's register under the year 1075. So it's maybe a triumphalistic post-schismatic, post-1054 set of 27 statements of the authority of the Pope. Some of them represent ambitious expressions of secular authority. Ambitious expressions of secular authority that the church isn't sure about. And they're not de fide, they're not infallible, all of them. Some of them are, some of them aren't. The principles expressed in Dictatus Papae are mostly those expressed by the Gregorian Reform, which had been initiated by Gregory decades before he became Pope. The axioms of the Dictatus advance the strongest case for papal supremacy and infallibility. The axiom that it may be permitted to him to depose emperors, that's a secular authority that the church has been waxed and waned on in terms of teaching. It's a theory. It's a theory. Church, you have to admit as a Catholic, for the first 500 or 600 years, 700 years, was minimalistic in terms of not papal supremacy ecclesiologically, but papal supremacy at the level of secular power of the Pope was papal minimalist. Then the next 700 or 800 years or so, let's call it 800 years, the church became quite maximalist, saying things like this, that it may be permitted to the Pope to depose emperors. And there's some other quite secularly ambitious expressions of papal power here. I'm the first one to admit it. It's not nearly as important as people who listened to last night's Spaces came away saying, because as Jay admitted several times, well, this is not an infallible expression of the Pope. And he was like mocking that, but it's key. I don't know what else to do. You could say it in a mocking tone. Oh, well, now Catholics are going to respond, this isn't infallible. You know what this is like? A kid asks his parents, hey, can we go to Disneyland tomorrow? And they're like, maybe. You build the theory, we'll entertain it. Maybe, but maybe not. We're leaning towards it, though. And then the next day comes and he's like, hey, you promised us we could go infallibly. And the parent is like, absolutely, I did not. The kid can't then turn to his other parent and be like, oh, yeah, you might have said maybe. Don't hold us to this. But I decided then I was going to hold you to it anyway. I mean, that's all Jay was doing last night. If it's not infallible, it's not infallible. And so we went from 700 years of secular minimalism for the Pope, 700 or 800 years of papal maximalism secularly for the Pope. The last 500 years or so, it's been trending toward papal minimalism again, especially the last 100 years. But trending that way ever since the Reformation, trending downward. This is only a problem. And we're talking about expressions of the secular authority of the Pope. Very complex question. And I've wrestled with it lots, and a lot of good thinkers have. Well, I don't know. You get the two swords theory. I think Boniface out of Unum Sanctum. Well, even the two swords theory there are two really, really divergent, opposite ways you could spin it. You read the work of Thomas Pink, and you're like, this is quite plausible. You say what the trads say about like Dignitatis Humanae, and you're like, this is also plausible. It's an open theory, what the Pope's secular authority is. And this interests me most in terms of like Pio Nono and the Italian Risorgimento. This is my biggest interest because it has to do with Catholic Republic type arguments. I'm not that interested in it. But the only reason I'm addressing it here is we admit, as like the parents to the kid wanting to go to Disneyland, the church has always been like, these are theories. They're theories that were leaned into for 500, 600, 700 years at a time, but they were never claimed to be infallible. And you can mock that. Oh, it's a stupid distinction, but it's not a stupid distinction. If the parent says, well, we're leaning towards going to Disneyland tomorrow, but don't hold us to it, you can't hold them to it, no matter how much you mock the distinction of unaccountability. When you say, look, I don't want to be accountable, I'm just telling you, yeah, I'd like to go to Disneyland tomorrow too, but I'm not promising you. If I promise you, my word's my bond. It is that simple. And I had another friend who came away from the spaces last night, and he was like, that was really compelling. I was like, what? It's a real distinction. Later medieval developments of the relationship between spiritual and secular power would come with Pope Boniface VIII, who famously formulated the image of the two swords in a papal bull, Unum Sanctum. So this is a bull. And that's in 1302. So I know Dictatus Papae 27 statements kind of compiled, claimed by Gregory VII, might have been a kind of impetus for frustrations leading to 1054. And I'm not defending the secular papal maximalism. I don't even defend the strong papal, ecclesiastical papal maximalism, like everything a pope says is more or less infallible, the way some of these guys like Lofton and them have begun. That, I mean, that's just nowhere in the Catholic tradition. That's ecclesiastical. But I'm enough of an ecclesiastical maximalist to say, well, there's definitely a papal supremacy and a universal jurisdiction. And I just read you a bunch of Eastern fathers in the first Christian millennium saying so. That doesn't mean that we haven't had bad popes. It doesn't mean, and here's where I'll make an admission, that as Catholics, we have a really together ecclesiology. We have an ecclesiology that I think later will hang together, and the explanatory gap can be covered, but it has not been covered yet. And this is a source of frustration to me, a source of embarrassment in some level. It doesn't mean it's not true. I mean, I just pointed out these are fundamental flaws if you're a Protestant or an Orthodox. And you're not in union with the Pope, by your own Eastern fathers, you need to be. And they admit this, and they admit it's an ecclesiological papal supremacy enough to be bound by him. That's just Christianity. The Pope was always binding people. Exercising a universal jurisdiction from Clement I on. That's like the fourth Pope. Peter's number one, right? What is Linus number two? I never memorized this. And they didn't even have means of communicating with each other. They didn't have technology. And the fourth Pope, less than 100 years in, is like, I want you guys to obey me, all you other bishops. That's remarkable. But as Catholics, we have to admit that there is no meta magisterium. There's no magisterium on the magisteria. There is no meta ecclesiology. And this is a source of frustration to good Catholic scholars as well. There's no magisterium telling you, okay, Francis has flushed out the mole, but it's always been a problem. A little to a medium problem, not one that should drive anyone from Catholicism into the ranks of the other Christian sects that have existential problems. I just showed you. Orthodoxy has this existential problem. There is no such thing as a first among equals or mutual submission, a commander who can't command. That's bunk. It's feminist nonsense. It is for feminists, and I would say Orthodox, who are afraid of Papa. They have Papa issues. Now, we have every reason under Francis to have some daddy issues, a daddy who hates us. But it does happen occasionally that we get a pope really bad. He might be the worst, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a more, one cannot long for a more coherent, clear teaching on, okay, are there 4 levels of magisterial teaching? The way you gather together all of, Denzinger and Ott and Cardinal Newman, and you're like, okay, so if the Pope doesn't teach ex cathedra and he teaches wrongly, am I actually bound to say that 2 and 2 is 5? If he's like, well, you owe a religious submission of will and intellect to, okay, he might be wrong, but you have to repeat the wrongness. We need clear, this should be 2nd grade catechism stuff. You know what I wish? What I wish is not necessarily true. I'm not a wishful thinker guy. But it seems by recto ratio that you really should only have 2 levels of magisterium. The Pope or councils either must claim to be infallible, or else if they're not infallible, they're fallible, and recto ratio can't have us defending their position. But it's quite embarrassing that we have no magisterium of the magisterium. You get guys like Denzinger, Ott, saying, oh, well, I kind of pieced it together. There are really like 4 levels of certitude. And it's stupid. It's rather stupid. You get, it's inviting our enemies to mock us. Not our enemies, but other Christian sects that want to hold spaces like last night and say, well, this looks really weird. You guys were at the level of what's the secular capacity for power of the Pope? For 600 or 700 years, nothing. And then you get the Carolingians, and they start expanding it from, say, 700 to 1400, 700 to 1500. I don't know. I haven't studied it closely enough. For about 800 years, then you get these expressions like, the Pope can make every knee bend to him. His name should be the only name mentioned in the liturgy. He could depose emperors, like at a moment's notice. You're like, well, I'm not so sure about that. Unlike universal jurisdiction and papal supremacy within and between and among the bishops, which is there from the very beginning of 2,000 years of Christianity. Unlike that, you have a solid 600 or 700 years where the Pope is not meddling in secular affairs. Then for 7 or 8 centuries, and I guess this pissed off the Eastern Church, maybe partly rightly. Now the Pope is claiming, like, if the Pope says jump, every secular authority in the world has to say how high. And they're like, we don't like that. And that was an opposite trend. None of them were infallible. And then the last 500 years, we have a return direction of travel to the original kind of secular minimalism. And so without a competent meta-magisterium, other Christians like Protestants and Orthodox will point to that weakness, and they'll make, I think, what I take to be false converts. They'll say, oh, this is a contradiction. The church just committed an error. No, these are very complex theories of power that have many, many sophisticated layers related to current abiding geopolitics and implications of justice, natural justice, allocation of power. It's what level, what are the sizes of nations? What's going on in Europe at the time? It's very different pre and post Carolingians, right? Otto the Great versus Charles Martel and his line versus what's going on at Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, basically during and after the Reformation. It makes sense that the church might change on this, but we have to more clearly say, this you have to accept, this you don't. And the church just hasn't been as good on that as it could be. What do we have to accept from Francis, and what don't we? We hear a goofy new statement every day, every other day. Everyone thinks, oh, Francis is the one that's flushed it out. But it's always been a problem, and it's always kind of shocking to me and shocks my conscience a little bit that there isn't a better ecclesiology of the ecclesiology, meta magisterium. There needs to be a council where we get this together, where it doesn't look like we're just moving the goalposts. I'm not saying we are. I'm saying it looks that way, and it's easy to exaggerate upon the sort of ostensible appearance of that if you're Orthodox or Protestant. Anyway, get the Catena Aurea. I think this is really, really helpful. Get all 4 Gospels of Thomas's Catena Aurea. Trust that papal supremacy ecclesiologically has been a thing since the very early days of the church, since the first, second Christian millennium. You had a first exercise of judicial universal jurisdiction in around 100 AD. And you had all of these Eastern fathers saying, yeah, the Pope is over all of the patriarchs and primates and is their pastor, their supreme shepherd. He can tell them what to do. Of course, that's the nature of authority. The idea of a commander who can't command, a first among equals, is feminist. It's papaphobia, and it's feminism. And I hope maybe someday some of my Orthodox friends will see it. Deus Volt people, God bless you all. We'll see you soon.